Light a campfire and everyone's a storyteller. Join us for some thought-provoking and beyond fireside chats.
Hello and welcome to Leave Our World a Better Place. My name is Kasia and my guest today is Jes Gruner, African Parks Regional Ops Manager for Rwanda. Jes will be speaking to us about the African Parks Management Model and describing over a decade of work and rehabilitation that has gone into transforming Akagera National Park into Rwanda's only Big Five wildlife reserve. Jes, thank you so much for coming on to chat to me this morning. It's a pleasure to get to know you and get to know the story of Africa Parks in Rwanda.
Yeah, nice to speak to you too, and hope we can be of some help.
Before we get right into the details about African Parks, what you do, what African Parks does in Rwanda and Akagera National Park in particular, just give us a little bit of background about yourself. What is your background? How did you develop a passion for nature conservation? And how did you end up where you are?
I was brought up in Malawi and attended boarding school in the UK from a very young age, but was brought up primarily on a farm in Malawi and was exposed to nature and the outdoors life. So when I returned from university studying applied biology, animal science, I went back ideally to our parents' farm, but then decided quite quickly that the farm was going to remain. But we had a choice, or I had a choice, to be able to expose myself to other things. So I volunteered for 3 years in a community game farm to rebuild that. And then after those 3 years of volunteering, I was a little bit broke. So fortunately, African Parks had set itself up in Malawi and in Majeti, and they recruited me as operations manager. And that was in 2006. And things have materialized since then. You know, I was a young man then, but now I've got my wife and 3 kids, and we're based here in Rwanda. But conservation has always been a passion. Nature, getting our hands dirty, and just being part of the fresh air is paramount.
Absolutely, that's pretty special. So talking about African Parks, can you explain a little bit about how the model works? You know, what attracted you to it and why you feel that it works? Obviously, you know, you've been with them for more than 15 years. So, you know, you'd have quite an intimate knowledge of how the whole process works.
Yeah, as you said, you know, I've been more than 15 years with African Parks. So in some ways I might be a little bit biased, but there are very few full management models for conservation areas. And this is exactly what African Parks is. It's a full management model of a conservation entity, be it a national park, a game reserve, community reserve. And when I say full, it means from community development to park management to tourism to infrastructure, and supporting the government with some regulations within those national parks. So in essence, it's like running your own farm on behalf of the government. And there are no other models like that in conservation that I know of in the continent, or very few that fully manage an entity. Very often they will advise, but not necessarily be responsible for their actions.
Okay, so I know that African Parks has used this model throughout Africa to manage the rehabilitation of national parks. And the organization is active in quite a few countries. But I'm curious about Rwanda in particular. Now, African Parks has been working there since 2010, I think. Can you talk a little bit about why Rwanda and Akagera in particular was chosen as a good site for African Parks management?
Yeah, first of all, African Parks wants to do as much conservation as possible, but obviously there's limitation with funds. You know, we can't be everywhere. But primarily we take on the management mandate of gazetted areas on behalf of governments. And in the late 2000s, a representative from the Rwandan government came to Malawi, Majeti, the place where I was working at the time, and actually said, you know what, this would be a great model for Akagera. African Parks doesn't per se go looking for conservation zones, but is invited by governments to look after the required area. And in this case, it was Akagera National Park. So African Parks, as one of their processes, came and did a due diligence. And just to give you some highlights on that, Akagera is the only savanna ecosystem in Rwanda, and the only wetland system. There are 4 national parks in Rwanda, but they're all different in biomes. So that in itself is very important to protect the savanna ecosystem. And that's why African Parks felt it was very, very, how would we say, very attractive, but also the progressive Rwandan government is just sealed it in honesty.
Well, Rwanda is really building up a reputation for being extremely committed to conservation.
Yeah, it's a very progressive nation on conservation and a multitude of other things. And I won't hesitate to say conservation actually bodes well for Rwanda.
Now, you mentioned that African Parks, one of the key relationships it has is that it works with government. And in Rwanda, I think the government body that you work with is the Rwandan Development Board. Is that correct?
Yeah, the Rwandan Development Board, or RDB, is the conservation arm of government, like very many other nations have their conservation arm. This is RDB.
And how does that relationship between African Parks and the RDB work? What are you responsible for? What are they responsible for? And how is that balanced?
Well, the dynamics is it's a PPP, which is a public-private partnership. And we actually operate as a company in Rwanda. We set up a company called Akagera Management Company, of which African Parks is a 51% shareholder and the RDB 49% shareholder. But Akagera Management Company, as said earlier, has a full mandate to develop and manage Akagera National Park and its surrounding with the communities to become basically the lead park in the nation and show best practice for East Africa on conservation of savanna ecosystems. So it's a true partnership, and we wouldn't be where we are without the actually meaningful collaboration of the RDB.
So it's pretty much about using sort of your expertise and your best practices and bringing all of that to bear on the management of the park itself. And the Rwanda Development Board sort of backs that and backs the decisions that you make. Is that correct? I'm just trying to get the right sort of understanding.
Yeah, it's exactly correct. It's a business approach to conservation, which is one of African Parks' key sayings. So African Parks does also come with the financial support, be it through philanthropy or different institutions. And then really important in conservation, it's a long-term management mandate. So it's a 20-year mandate to manage. We set up the Akagera Management Company, which is a Rwandan company paying taxes, really showing the vision for sustainability, really showing the contribution of taxes to the fiscal authorities here in Rwanda. So it really is a business approach to conservation, and African Parks, with the expertise, with the funding, with the experience from other parks and other areas, can really support the Rwandan government in boosting and rejuvenating Akagera National Park.
Well, going back to 2010, obviously, Rwanda had come through quite a tumultuous phase in its history. Can you talk a little bit about what was the situation at Akagera back at that time when African Parks took on the management of the reserve?
Yeah, I have to go even further back. Akagera is one of the oldest national parks, apart from Kruger and Selous and those places. It was founded in 1934, and it was originally 270,000 hectares or 2,700 square kilometers with an additional hunting zone attached to it. We all know of the turmoil that happened 27 years ago in the genocide against the Tutsi. And that really was also the demise of the nation, but also conservation and Akagera at the time. But fortunately, that was stabilized later on, and there was a lot of returnees from Uganda and Tanzania who had a lot of livestock, who accumulated livestock over time, and they returned to Rwanda. And again, Rwanda is the most densely populated nation on the continent. There was very little space for them, and for the livestock. So by default, and they had no choice, they had to use Akagera for their livestock. And that became a real problem for wildlife, especially for the carnivores. And then also there was some illegal hunting for bushmeat. And unfortunately, Akagera really struggled for approximately 10 years in that chapter, so much so that the lions were wiped out and such. But the government of Rwanda in 2000 re-gazetted Akagera National Park and kept 100,000 hectares or 1,000 square kilometers and redistributed the other balance, but on the condition that everyone pull out of what was the new conservation area. And that initiative in itself was the savior of what is now Akagera National Park.
It's a fascinating history, definitely.
No, it is. And then, fortunately, in 2010, this PPP, public-private partnership with African Parks, occurred. And we had a lot of things to deal with. But the first of all was to really understand the dynamics of where we were, what we'd come to, and what we were doing. At that time, I was the operations manager, and it was sad to see it, but bushmeat was still the main source of illegal activities, and hippos and buffalo, the remaining ones, were being killed en masse, and unfortunately, like 3 to 5 a week. It was just not sustainable, and we really had to get a grip of that very quickly. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had founder populations to build up again, and it was paramount to save the wildlife we had. It's easier to let animals multiply than to bring animals back.
I think in the past 2 years, rewilding is a term that's become really popular, and that's really great. But I also think that a lot of people use it in a way that's maybe a little bit, that maybe doesn't fully understand the term. There seems to be a perception that, if you leave nature alone and give it a chance, it's just going to come back on its own. But there's actually a huge amount of management work that needs to go into it on the back end in order for that to happen. Obviously, when you first took over the management, there's a lot that needed to be done to prepare for reintroduction of species and for species to build up again. Can you talk a little bit about what you actually did in those first 5 years of management to ensure buy-in from surrounding communities to set up the park and get it ready for reintroductions of wildlife and for some of the other initiatives that you would carry out a bit later?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as in you're 100% right. Rewilding is quite a sexy term nowadays, but rewilding can only happen if nature is given a break. That is one of our key mandates, is to secure the integrity. And when we got to Akagera, that was it: secure the integrity of the area and keep it safe. And then let nature be. And then then the true rewilding comes in, because you're letting it happen. If you don't give it a break, it can never bounce back. So our first couple of years, we really had to get a grips of the law enforcement. It was paramount to do that, to ensure that, the 300 hippos that were there were not going down, but going to start to multiply. The 36 roan antelope that we had were going to multiply. The 60 elephants we had were not going to go down, but multiply. So law enforcement was paramount. And then absolutely critical to that was also the government of Rwanda made a commitment to fund a fence on our western boundary, because we have a really hard boundary with the communities, or Akagera does. As I said, Rwanda is the most populated nation on the continent, densely populated nation on the continent. And human and wildlife conflict was a huge issue for the communities, but also for the park. So the only way to address this was through a fence. So the government of Rwanda helped put that in. And then slowly, after year 2 and 3, we managed to get a real good understanding and stabilize the park on management, improve the infrastructure, access roads, which allowed for better patrol coverage, which then allowed for better tourism. The fence came along. And then absolutely paramount, and it wouldn't be a success if this didn't happen, was the actual employment. We have extensive staff employed from the local communities who are actually getting a sustainable income and could see the progress that was being made, that allowed them to go to the communities and say, guys, we're making a living out of this park, a legal living. Let's promote and let's keep the place safe.
And that's quite crucial, isn't it? You've spoken about law enforcement and securing the park itself, but part of the African parks model is that this always ties in with community development, education, employment, and actually making sure that the communities see the benefits of that conservation flowing. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, we'd be so naive if we thought our management and the progress of Akagera would be purely law enforcement. Yes, we did have to start that and upskill that, but that goes hand in hand with community development, sensitization, trying to improve the livelihoods of the communities economically, improve through education. So we have a huge, we have a department specifically allocated to community development. We focus on a lot of aspects, be them education, enterprise, different business initiatives, improving the economic well-being of the people outside. So, and that's not just a one-off, that is continual. And we need to continually improve that, continually sit with the communities, with the local authorities, and address what the needs are, but also try and give solutions to it. I'm not a firm believer of just giving, but helping build sustainable solutions and building capacity. And that's the only way Akagera will stay into the future, is if the community surrounding the park actually acknowledge that it should be there.
Absolutely, that's very crucial. And I mean, everything you say about African parks, and it is actually very similar to And Beyond and the work that we do with Africa Foundation. And I know that a shared belief that we have is that conservation education is crucial. Is there stuff that you do at Akagera with your environmental education program, that you feel is particularly crucial? I think you also target children in the local communities with conservation education. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've developed what we call the Savannah Learning Center, which is a plot of land outside the park, just on the periphery, where we have a large hall with displays and activities linked to the savanna ecosystem. And then the last chapter is actually about conservation in Rwanda. But further to that, we have a little amphitheater there, and presently building a library and a basketball court. We call it basically a local garden, where we want to promote practices, local practices, chicken rearing, mushroom farming, all these alternative income generating activities. For example, we have chicken rearing there for eggs, and all the lodges inside the park should be buying the eggs from there, not from Kigali, the capital. So we're trying to be a stimulus at the same time as educational, but also being with the community. It shouldn't be a them and us in the park and outside. So we bring over 2,000 kids a year. COVID did have an effect on that, but 2,000 kids a year from local schools around the park, and 300 adults from local leaders to churches from around the park. And just as I said, we've also developed a dormitory to house 60 people, because now we'd actually like to have further reach within the country of Rwanda, where people could actually come and see the savanna ecosystem and understand Akagera, because it is very different to the rest of Rwanda.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really important to have that understanding. And I think I saw somewhere that about 50% of the visitors to Akagera are local to Rwanda. Does that sound like the right kind of stat?
No, it is. We've gone from 12,000 guests in 2010 to just in 2019, 50,000 visitors. And we have tried over that time to stabilize the patronage of the park to be at least 50% Rwandans. We really need Akagera to be for the Rwandans primarily, and we want people to come and visit their own park in their own country, without the stigma of thinking it's expensive, it's difficult, it's only for tourists. This is a good day's retreat for Rwandans. They can come in a busload. We've fixed roads up so they can actually come as a group of 30 in a bus, and we have kept the pricing very very low to allow for that. Sometimes conservationists say that's not the greatest model, because it's a high turnover of people, minimum return, because we keep it cheap, but we actually are trying to cover the spectrum of markets. For tourists, it's a higher pricing. International tourists, there's a higher pricing bracket, and they generally actually stay longer, whilst the Rwandans just come and visit for the day.
Well, I think it's really important, to build up the reputation of the park. You have to start sort of internally within Rwanda as well, and just to bring awareness. Earlier you were talking about the history of Akagera, and you said it's been around as long as parks such as the Kruger or the Sulu. And those are such well-known names and such sort of, the legends of the safari industry. But Rwanda really doesn't get that kind of same recognition for anything than, I suppose, gorilla tracking. It's not really known as a big five tourism destination. And obviously, what you want is for Akagera to be self-sustaining through tourism. So are there things that you're doing to change that perception and to give it its own sort of share of the limelight as a big five destination?
Yeah, first of all, we really had to stabilize Akagera and improve the product. Good law enforcement allowed for multiplication of wildlife and the relaxed wildlife, which then allowed for better viewing of tourism, and that became almost self-marketing. And then you're 100% right. When we came in 2010, gorillas was the key product, but also the Rwandan government has seen that there is a need, and we call it beyond gorillas, a need for selling Rwanda as a whole package, one package in itself. You can go to the gorillas, you can see the savanna ecosystem really easily now without jumping in a plane. You can go by road within a day. You're at the other national park, and then you can go to Nyungwe National Park, which is also a walking activity where you can go and see chimpanzees and be in the rainforest. So that is just the national parks. Then there's a history of Rwanda, unfortunately a bit of a sad one, but also a history of rejuvenation, revival in the last 27 years. And then Lake Kivu, which is very spectacular in its own right. So Rwanda has a lot of products that it can sell apart from just the gorillas, or let's say complement the gorillas. And Rwanda can comfortably be done in 7 to 10 days without exiting the country to go and see somewhere else. And you would get a plethora of activities achieved, and you definitely leave fully. How would you say? You're just very satisfied of what you had seen. So everyone is driving that way. The Rwandan government is driving that way, but it's only possible if you do conservation right and you do tourism right. And altogether, we seem to be on the right track, and that's amazing. Just for example, Rwanda, when we came in 2010, only had a fleet of 2 to 3 planes, a bit old, but now they have extensive aircraft, over I think 12, flying across the globe, and that just shows you the progressiveness of this nation.
Well, it's incredible diversity, and I think in post-COVID travel, I think we've seen it a lot that people tend to prefer to stick to one destination now and to explore it more in depth. So I think that's only a positive move for Rwanda.
Yeah, it is. And as I said, they've made it easy. Access roads are so good. Public transport, roads are good between the parks. It's easy to get into Rwanda. They've dealt so well with the COVID pandemic. You get visa on arrival. There's no difficulties there. So it's just a smooth operation. Some people say it's Africa for beginners, but you know what? You could come again and again because it's just right.
That's amazing. Okay, I'd like to go back and talk a little bit more about some of the reintroductions that happened at Akagera. So you mentioned earlier that lions had actually effectively gone locally extinct in the park. And I know that was a species that you targeted for reintroduction. And I think it was in 2015 that that the first lions came in. How did you decide that the park was ready for the presence of lions? And then what was the process that you followed? How did you source the lions, bring them in? It must have been a huge project.
Yeah, again, sorry to digress, but Akagera used to be home to over 300 lions. So that was a huge statement in itself when it was a bigger place.
That's a very significant lion population.
Exactly. Unfortunately, they were wiped out due to the lions predating on the livestock and then being poisoned out. So when we took over in 2010, we actually knew that we wanted to bring back lions, but we had to make it right first. We had to address the issues and really do a lot of community sensitization. And then most of all, have the predator base for the lions. And with the commitment of the Rwandan government fencing the western boundary, and we predator-proofed it, it allowed in 2015 for us to bring back 7 lions, 5 females and 2 males. Because the prey base was there, the security of the park was there, the fence was in there. 2 years of community dialogue had been done to confirmed to the community that it wasn't going to be a negative impact, we developed sports events called the Lion Cup as sensitization. And then in 2015, we succeeded in bringing these lions from South Africa, and they're absolutely thriving now. And we actually keep them around 40 animals through contraception and hysterectomy and vasectomies, just to ensure we're a closed system. So the lions would actually thrive and go up to 150, 200, but that actually wouldn't be in balance with the size of the area. And we want to make sure we have to manage that. Unfortunately, when you're a closed system, you have to manage that. But 40 animals, very relaxed, a key tourism product, and doing really well.
Well, that's actually incredible. I think that in less than 10 years, the population has gotten to a stage where you actually have to put in management practices to keep it to a certain level. Having gone from zero to that, it's an extraordinary success.
No, it is. And, I think it's very similar to, as I said, they came from South Africa, but the females actually came from Pinda and the males from Tembe. And these females were already very relaxed, and being relaxed to the new ecosystem in Akagera actually supported them to not wander far and to quickly start reproducing. So we have some of Pinda's genes here in Akagera.
That's wonderful. So another species that you brought back to Akagera is rhino. And I think as far as I'm aware, the first translocation that took place was black rhino, wasn't it, in 2017?
Yeah, that's correct. It was the eastern black rhino, subspecies Michaeli, of which there's only approximately, or at the time there was only approximately 900 left in the wild. So we brought back 18 in 2017, and today they're thriving and doing really well and reproducing. It's a black rhino, so people don't see it that often, but we are definitely in another range state that has black rhinos purely for conservation, number one.
I'm quite curious, what was the motivation for focusing on black rhino first? Was it just a species that did better in the park, or was there a particular reason why you did that first?
Again, the Akagera did have the eastern black rhinos, and the last one we have a picture of the last one seen from a helicopter in 2007. But as they were secretive, we hear that there used to be approximately 80 black rhino in Akagera. But most definitely they were not here when we got here. So the eastern black rhino Michaeli is a species that really needs conservation. As I said, there's only 900 left. We wanted another safe haven for them. So we felt that Akagera was a really good spot, and Rwanda a really good nation to have them in. That saying of don't keep all your eggs in one basket. The true wilderness areas for this eastern black rhino are Tanzania and Kenya, and that is it. So now Rwanda is another range state, just in case of problems in the future in any other nation.
Always, the bigger population footprint you have, the better.
Exactly, and it's a similar environment. So it was a no-brainer, in honesty.
So, just out of curiosity, so black rhino were actually endemic to Rwanda, is that right?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. They used to be in the Akagera region in Tanzania, and one of the first ever translocations of rhino in the early 40s, 50s was done from there to Akagera. And they were they were introduced in the 50s. It's not to say we historically we know what was here in the 1800s. I'm pretty sure they used to be here, but documentation doesn't show that. But they were brought here in the 40s, 50s. Unfortunately, did well, but then came to their demise. So we were the second round, and hopefully we can be the last round of them just thriving into the future.
Fantastic. That's actually a really cool story. And white rhino, were they also found in the region, or was that something that kind of flowed from the reintroduction of black rhino, the decision to bring them back as well?
Well, just over time with the conservation of Rwanda and Akagera as being successful with the lions and the eastern black rhino, zoos in Europe asked if we would take 5 zoo Michaeli rhinos and rewild them here. And that worked well. We did lose 2, unfortunately. One just never settled, and another one, she just wasn't used to the wild and actually challenged an elephant and came to her demise. But that's a reality of these things we do. But the other three are doing fantastically well. So Akagera sort of became a little bit on the spotlight for conservation. And when we get to white rhinos, we weren't taking the purist attitude. DRC Garamba was the last home to the northern white rhino. We know the southern white rhino from basically Zambia down to South Africa, and there's a small population in Ziwa in Uganda. We feel that, and felt and still do, that white rhino really need as much help as they can get for conservation for their own species. And upon bringing the lions and rhinos in 2015 and 17, the vets, the conservationists who were here in that time just said this is absolutely a phenomenal place for white rhino. So that's where the thinking came. And then everybody was on board at the end of last year or at the beginning of last year and said, let's do this. White rhinos, in honesty, haven't got that positive a future. Let's try and do something positive for them. Pending all feasibility assessments, which we did, which was vegetation assessments, security assessments, the risk of moving the animals, everything said it should be done, and we managed to succeed. So it's a new state for white rhinos, and presently they're doing fantastically well. And it doesn't go without risk, moving so many animals such a distance to a new environment, where they put new different parasites, but it's worth the shot for white rhinos.
At this stage, the rhino population is in such decline that I think any new habitat that is actually suitable for them that you can make use of is absolutely amazing. So, and just in terms of the size of this translocation that you spoke about, that took place a couple of months ago, towards the end of 2021, it's been billed as the largest ever translocation of white rhino, it was 30 animals that came into Akagera from South Africa.
Absolutely, yeah, it was 30 white rhinos, females and males, from South Africa, from Pinda and beyond, and to Akagera National Park. So it's the single largest one-off move of so many animals in one shot. There's been a move of rhinos of much higher numbers, but not in one go. But this just showed it can be done. And I think the conservation world should be looking at this to try and continue this where possible, to find safe environments for animals that are doing really well. And that's the case in Pinda. They've just managed to secure them so well. The management have done such a great job that across the board, your species are multiplying, and this allows you to really have meaningful conservation and supporting other entities rebuild conservation zones. And that's just a absolutely huge statement.
It must have been quite an emotional thing to see all these rhinos arrive. I mean, I know it was such a carefully choreographed move, and it took so long. And I also know that you've been away from Rwanda for a while. Are you keen to get back to Akagera and actually see how your rhinos are doing?
Yeah, I've been away almost 2 months, but I'm shooting off there tomorrow morning. I'm going to happily spend a couple of days with the rhinos. They're doing really well. They're in what we call a halfway house, which is a really big pen of a couple of 100 hectares. Just acclimatizing. Even though I haven't been there, I get daily updates and photographs of them daily to see that. But I'm really excited to see them. And as you said, it's super emotional when they came. It was just like a 1,000-piece puzzle, putting all the pieces together, from the vets to the logistics to the flights to securing the animals in the first place, and securing the donor. So a lot of players, like-minded players who actually want to get something done, and then the absolute collaboration from the Rwandan government and the South African government, allowing for this cross-country move to take place.
It's pretty amazing when it all falls together like that. Jess, we've spoken about, the big five and some of the key iconic species like the lion and the rhino, but that's not everything that Akagera is about, is it? The park is home to a number of endangered species, and some of them are less better known than others. Can you speak about some of the endangered species at Akagera and, what the park is best known for?
In honesty, Akagera, when we first went there in 2010, it was devoid of quite a lot of wildlife or minimal numbers, but the scenery in itself is just breathtaking. You can be blown away by just the scenery, the rolling hills, the savanna plains, the wetlands. It's got one of the largest wetlands in there, the Akagera River. So it just was saying, I'm special, but I need to have animals in me, that this is the term of Akagera. So Akagera is very, very special. And it has over 400 bird species, almost 500 bird species, which is huge in itself for basically 100,000 hectares. But some of the species have actually come back, in honesty. Bringing the lions has actually allowed us to see more lappet-faced vultures, white-backed and white-headed, which were critically endangered, which have been appearing in the last 2 years and more frequently. So that is a knock-on effect of good conservation. And then just last December, the Rupel's vulture was sighted. So that's critically endangered. So those are some of the birds. So not so much the sexy species, but ecosystem management, it comes in its entirety. It doesn't come as just iconic species. Obviously, we brought back the lions, which numbers are going down across the globe and their habitat is going down. The rhinos, elephants have multiplied from 60 animals to over 130 now. And then we have some key other species like the sitatunga in the swamps and the endangered shoebill, and are a very good home to actually a very high density of leopards, which are not critically endangered, but are vulnerable. And then we have a few pangolins. I know Pindar does have some, but we have sighted pangolins, very, very scarce and rare and only on camera traps, but we are home to a couple of pangolins.
As you say, these may not be the most glamorous or the best known species, but it's just so fantastic to see that diversity returning.
It does, and we will see that going into the future. I'm sure more birds coming in that never used to be around.
Now, Jess, you've spoken about the significance that Akagera has in terms of sort of the savanna species and that type of environment. But what the reserve is also known for is that it's home to Central Africa's largest protected wetland. What does this mean in terms of wildlife diversity and bird diversity and the species that the reserve is able to support? And, does it add to the tourist experience that people can have in the park?
It definitely does add to the tourism experience because it adds a diversity where people can go out on a lake, on a boat cruise, can see the swamps, can see the different life that is in the papyrus swamps. But in reality, on the conservation and ecological side, by preserving a wetland system, it cleans and filters a lot of the toxicities because it's the Akagera River that flows into these wetlands. And then it's also a place for underwater species fish to multiply and to be safe. And fortunately, restock the rivers further down because the lakes will never be depleted of fish in Akagera because they're let to be. We do have a sustainable harvest of fish by the community, and we do that hand in hand, which has been an absolutely huge collaboration with the community and a huge boost to them income-wise, but also nutritional-wise, and a model of co-management of natural resources. But by just preserving that whole place, it actually preserves the environment around and restocks fish downstream, which allows people to have livelihoods.
So it's a really big knock-on effect as well in terms of what preserving that wetland has on the environment all around it.
Yeah, the conservation value, but the economic value are vast.
So now we spoke a little bit at the beginning about the situation at Akagera when African Parks started the management of the park. It's now 11, 12 years down the line. How far would you say you've come towards the goal of the park being self-sustaining? And what have been some of the most important milestones along this journey?
Yeah, again, I digress and I go back to 2010 where we only had 12,000 guests. And one of the key principles of African Parks is revenue retention. We only made $200,000 on a just over $2 million budget, which was So basically, we were only 10% sustainable at the time. By the end of 2019, we had 50,000 guests. We had managed to develop 2 lodges and get 1 totally revamped. And Akagera generated $2.6 million and was 80% sustainable. Unfortunately, the globe had been hit by the COVID pandemic, and so did all the nations, and so did we. So we took a huge dive and became back to 25% sustainable in 2020, and we've just finished 2021, and it's bounced back slightly. So we're just over 40% sustainable, but we have the vision of getting back to full sustainability, hopefully in the next 5 years. And just with the reassurance that when we left 2019, we were 80% sustainable and we were on the right path. So we can really get there. We're very fortunate to have the huge collaboration by the Rwandan government and the commitment, and they even support us with $250,000 funding every year. But we also have the huge support from African parks, who always fund and commit to fund the shortfall, whatever the situation is, COVID or just a smaller shortfall. So we're very lucky with that.
Those are really impressive numbers. And I mean, there's no denying that COVID has just thrown any existing models or projections out the window over the past couple of years. But I mean, if you look back to what was happening before then, I don't think there's any doubt that you're very far down the road towards self-sustainability.
No, we've shown the trend. We've shown it can be done. And more importantly, Akagera has been secured both through the law enforcement, yes, but the community works that we do with the community themselves want Akagera to thrive now. And that's a huge, huge statement in itself. The economic filter down benefits that the communities have got, whilst also getting other benefits, is just, honestly, you can't really value it. You could say for every dollar spent, it goes to 20, 25 easily. So the trickle down is huge.
So, looking at the broader context of Rwanda, I know that following on to all the work that you've done at Akagera, African Parks has entered into an agreement to manage another wildlife area in Rwanda, Nyungwe. Is that correct?
Yeah, as of October 2020, we took on the management of Nyungwe National Park, which is a Albertine Rift rainforest, a pocket of 100,000 hectares, with a vast amount of endemic birds and a plethora of different species, rainforest species, and 13 different primate species as well.
And what are your plans for the park? Are there lessons that you've learned at Akagera that you can implement at Nyungwe as well?
Oh, huge experiences from Akagera have been taken to Nyungwe. We were only 1 year into it pretty much, and 2021 was really to get a good understanding of Nyungwe and the dynamics and the community. And it's very different to an ecosystem, but because of Akagera's experiences, we have really saved time on some processes, and the government really has assurance that we are getting on with it and the job we're doing, and we already have a keen partner in the government because of Akagera, so we can achieve a lot more, a lot quicker. That being said, the community is quite a lot larger around Nyungwe, and it's very, very rural. The terrain is very harsh, very wet, so we definitely have to put a lot more effort on the side of community with respect to having more visibility there, because the boundary is much greater, there's a higher population density, and the poverty is actually slightly higher. So we're really focusing on that at this time.
It's been a really fantastic glimpse, talking to you of what Rwanda has to offer. And it's definitely opened my eyes to a lot more of the diversity that the country has. To end off with, is there anything that you'd like to say to somebody who's thinking of Rwanda and just equating it with guerrilla tracking and, not planning to do anything else in the country other than that? Is there something that you'd like to say to someone like that to persuade them to experience Akagera or other parts of the country?
The most important thing is try and book that ticket to Rwanda, and book it for a week. Don't just leave it to the guerrillas, and don't listen to the stigma historically of the history of Rwanda. Things have changed in the last 27 years. Put it on your bucket list and put it on to actually experience Rwanda and that the gorillas is one of the products, but Rwanda in its entirety is a memory for life.
Having chatted to you and also, hearing everything that is being said about Rwanda and the nature conservation and the tourism industry, I have no doubt that it's definitely going to be a shining star of the future.
Absolutely. No, we hope to keep building it hand in hand with the government and like-minded entities. Conservation really does need it. And one of the ways through is through tourism to make it sustainable, community development, and, as I said, most importantly, like-minded, determined people to support nature.
Jess, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. Thank you for making the time to chat to me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Leave Our World a Better Place. Don't forget to subscribe to make sure that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to find out more about And Beyond, please log on to our website at andbeyond.com.